In today's video, I'm going to talk about the psychosocial theory of development first proposed by a psychologist named Erik Erikson. Erikson was a psychoanalytical psychologist who was greatly influenced by the work that Sigmund Freud had done earlier in the 20th century. Erikson agreed with Freud that development can largely be brought about from internal conflicts and tensions, but he disagreed with Freud in that this conflict and tension was driven solely by pleasureful and sexual urges. Erikson put more emphasis on the social nature of our development rather than on the sexual nature. Erikson also disagreed with Freud in that he believed that our personality and our psychology develops throughout our lifespan, whereas Freud largely believed that this was completed by the beginning of adolescence. In fact, of all the theories that I've discussed in this series, Erikson is the only one with stages that go throughout our lifespan and don't just end with adolescence. At the core of Erikson's psychosocial theory of development is the belief that we are motivated by a need to achieve competence in certain areas throughout our lives. Erikson believed that this happened during 8 separate events throughout our lifespan that led to periods of conflict and tension within us. He believed that successfully completing each of these developmental tasks that presented themselves to us provided us with a greater sense of competence and helped us to develop a healthier personality. Likewise, failure to master these tasks could lead to feelings of inadequacy and problems with other types of psychological issues later in life. The 8 stages of Erikson's psychosocial theory are numbered 1 to 8. And largely correspond to a certain time period in our lives. Each one is defined by a certain developmental task or challenge that must be faced by the person. Each of these developmental tasks can be viewed as being 2 opposing aspects. Stage 1 happens during infancy and begins at birth up to about the first 12 or 18 months of life. In this stage, the developmental task that we must face is known as trust versus mistrust. During this stage, the conflict that an infant must face is whether or not they can trust that their basic needs like nourishment, affection, shelter, and protection can be met by their caregiver. This ties in with the concept of attachment that I discussed in other videos. As the infant grows into toddlerhood, they go into stage 2, which is up to about 3 years of age. In stage 2, the developmental task that the toddler must face is known as autonomy versus shame or doubt. During this stage in a child's life, they start to develop a sense of independence in many tasks. Now, obviously we're talking about toddlers here, so independence is used more in reference to things like being able to walk, speak, and use the bathroom. It also refers to their increasing recognition of their own sense of a will of their own. This can be a difficult time where toddlers can be fussy and demanding. If they're encouraged in their pursuits in this stage, it fosters a sense of autonomy, but if not, it can lead to feelings of shame and doubt. Moving on, we have stage 3, from about 3 to 5 years of age. This stage's developmental task centers around a sense of initiative versus guilt. Children in this stage are beginning to experience a wider world outside of their home as they start to experience preschool. They're experiencing periods of less immediate guidance and allowed to explore their own interests, albeit in a very limited way. Children should be encouraged in these explorations to help boost their sense of initiative. Parents that tend to be overly controlling, rigid, or otherwise discourage their children may foster a sense of guilt and anxiety. As we move on into stage 4, we cover a period from about 6 years of age to the start of puberty, where children are expanding on the interests that they started to explore in stage 3. The developmental task is industry versus inferiority. In this stage, children start to become very inquisitive and generally have a thirst for knowledge. They're becoming more aware of their own individuality and expanding their social relationships outside of their immediate family. Caregivers, teachers, and friends need to encourage a sense of accomplishment to help develop the sense of industry. If not, the child may have a sense of inferiority and not be as motivated. So far, we've covered the first 4 stages of Erikson's stages of development. It's pretty fairly accepted that these first 4 stages largely happen in order and mostly correspond to a specific time in our lives. As we move into the last 4 stages, they become a little bit more flexible and don't necessarily have to happen in order, and I'll talk about that as we discuss them. When a child experiences puberty and becomes an adolescent, they enter into stage 5, which is roughly from about 12 to 18 years of age. The developmental task in this stage is identity versus role confusion. This can often be a time where an adolescent begins to question who they are as a person and may experiment with many different things as they begin to explore this question. For some adolescents, this can be a smoother transition, while others may experience more of an identity crisis. It's also a good example of how flexible the last 4 stages of Erikson's theory can be. There's no doubt in my mind that most adolescents experience a period of questioning who they are and what they're interested in, but I also know adults way older than 18 that struggle with this issue too. In fact, I even know more than a few adults that celebrate the fact that they don't really know who they are because they always like to reinvent themselves. As an adolescent matures into a young adult, they enter into stage 6, where the developmental task involves intimacy versus isolation. Erikson believed this happened from about 19 to 30, but we now usually extend that up to about 40 years of age. Adults begin to establish and build social relationships. For some, these relationships even begin to become more important than their familial relationships that they had earlier in life. This is also the stage where romantic interests become more of a focus, and adults typically begin to actively find a stable, long-lasting romantic relationship. Adults that are unable to establish these types of relationships may have difficulties with being isolated and lonely. As we continue to age, we go into middle adulthood in stage 7 of Erikson's theory. This stage lasts from about 40 to 65 years. The developmental task involves generativity versus stagnation. Generativity refers to a person's sense of caring and responsibility for others. Often, adults in this stage begin to wrestle with ideas of wanting to pass on their knowledge and experience to younger generations. This may propel them to work as mentors or teachers. They may struggle with thoughts involving whether they can still make a difference and achieve goals that may have been put off in earlier stages due to work and social responsibilities. As we go into the last stage of Erikson's theory, we enter a stage 8, which involves ego integrity versus despair. Erikson believed this stage involved a great deal of reflection and evaluation on the person's earlier life. If you're satisfied with your life, he believed you could age with grace and dignity. However, if you had regrets and feel that you may have missed out on a lot of things throughout your life, it could lead to feelings of despair. Erikson's theory is still very relevant to this day and highlights the importance of social interactions in our psychological development. One of the biggest criticisms of Erikson's theory is that the ages that he had initially used for his stages weren't completely accurate. After all, as I mentioned, there can be adults that go through periods of identity confusion. For this reason, don't think of his stages as being rigid, especially after about stage 4. They can be a little bit more flexible. The other big criticism of his theory is that sometimes people view it as being too negative. I totally understand this too, because essentially Erikson believed that development was really all about experiencing a series of crises throughout your life. While it may not be the happiest way to look at growth, it does make sense though. After all, if you look at your own life, I'm willing to bet that some of the biggest moments of growth for you also were a little difficult and uncertain at the time. They certainly felt like challenges at the time. However, they led to some of the biggest moments of growth in your life. I actually find this reassuring. Just think, the next time you're going through a really difficult moment in your life, Look at it as being a challenge that you can face and become a better, stronger, healthier person as a result of going through it. It may not make your problems magically go away, but maybe it'll help your mental health a little bit to understand that what you're going through may be a period of significant change and growth. Thanks for watching, everybody.